Hey there, it's Olivia-Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today it's time for me to start my Read It Backwards video for Percy Jackson and the Battle of the Labyrinth by Rick Riordan. This is the fourth book in the Percy Jackson series, and before we get started with the video, I've got two things to tell you. The first one being is, if you don't know what Read It Backwards is, I have a video for you that's going to explain everything you need to know, and I'll leave a link to that up above and down below. And the second thing you need to know is that this video is going to contain
spoilers.
So before we hop into this book, I would like to start by saying that I have no memory of whatever happens in this book whatsoever. So I do have memories of the plots to do with books 1 and 5, however I don't remember the main plots in books 2, 3 and 4. I remember random important scenes, but I couldn't tell you which book they fall into, so it'll be interesting to see if there are any scenes that I remember in this one in particular. But there is one thing that I know about this book, and that is that they are going to meet Daedalus, and I think Daedalus is not going to survive. I only know this because of a mythology to do with the Labyrinth, and I know that the Percy Jackson series is kind of a modern day take and spin-off on some of these mythology things, so if the Labyrinth is happening, you're probably going to have Daedalus around with it somewhere. And also because in the fifth book, Annabeth has Daedalus's laptop, so she needs to attain that in some way or form, and I bet it involves Daedalus himself. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should check out my first Read It Backwards video where I talk about the fifth book in the series. So I've read the first 100 pages of Percy Jackson and the Battle of the Labyrinth, and I'm here to discuss with you the first 100 pages, which is almost a third of the book. So the first thing that I came across was a descriptor I wasn't too happy with. We get to go to this school. Percy's trying a new school. It's the school of Paul, which is the mother's current boyfriend, and there's these cheerleaders who turn out to be these like half vampire things that attack him, and he describes one of the cheerleaders as icy blue eyes, blonde hair, but the other one is African American, and the descriptor that she gets is her hair is like Medusa's. And I feel like this book gets away with it just because it's Greek mythology, but at the same time I wasn't the happiest with that description, simply because I've had my own hair compared to Medusa multiple times across growing up, and it's just a bit of a personal hang up. I just don't like it. So there was that. Also, Percy goes to this new school. It's an orientation day and he absolutely wrecks the school, and I totally had forgotten that Percy has a history with ruining the schools. I knew that in the first book he has something at school and it doesn't go well, which is what prompts him to need to go to Camp Half-Blood, but I'd forgotten that this happens multiple times, that he has a track record, so it was just fun seeing that happen. And guess who's there in the opening chapter? It's Rachel, that girl that I said I really don't remember. So in this one we meet Rachel, and Percy's trying to avoid her at first because apparently last book they had some jazz together where Percy almost killed her, and then Rachel saved his life, and then Percy ran off, so he was like trying to avoid her, but then they end up working together against these crazy vampire cheerleader women. And I was just like, why is Rachel there? But I also found it very interesting Annabeth's reaction to meeting Rachel, because it's instant dislike, and Annabeth doesn't even know Rachel from Percy's previous encounter, so she has no reason to immediately dislike Rachel other than finding her maybe a threat to the romantic feels that she has. And I don't know how I feel about the immediate dislike that Annabeth has, but I know that dislike is extended into the last book with cause for it, because apparently Percy spends more time with Rachel than with Annabeth at some point, but that's further down the line. Then we get a little bit of context. I love how Rick Riordan has mini summaries, or like summary sentences at the beginning of the novel, because it definitely helps me who doesn't know anything. He says that Luke has already turned over to Kronos, and this is common knowledge, so it's nice to just know that, and apparently Nico is missing. So those are all things that we know. We as readers get to meet Miss O'Leary for the first time, which is the hellhound that I had no memory of in the fifth book, and I quite like that we're meeting her as readers, and yeah, for the first time in this book, because it means she's only in the last two books, so I feel a bit more justified in not having remembered her. We also get to see a little bit of the war starting and the gods realizing, hey, we've got problems here, so it's just a nice lead up that's threading into the next book. And as well as that, we go to Camp Half-Blood, and it's a little bit bittersweet reading this series backwards, because they're talking about how happy Beckendorf is, and Selena, and some other characters that I just know are dead in the future, which is a bit sad. But that's what happens when you read a series backwards. I also forgot that Percy does not only have dyslexia, but he also has ADHD. It's mentioned briefly when he's in a training fighting situation, and I believe that all demigods have it. It's something that is like their battle senses or whatever. I think I remember that reasoning, can't be entirely sure, but I forgot that this has ADHD rep in it as well as dyslexia rep, and quite like the dyslexia rep, it is just casually thrown in. There are moments where Percy's like, oh, and immediately asks a question on something even though it could be rude, simply because that's just the way that his attention span works with his ADHD. It also mentioned that Grover has a search for Pan, and Pan is the god of nature, and this search that Grover has for Pan is what starts off the whole quest that is given in this book, and we know that Pan is dead, or at least is going to be dead by the end of the book. That's what happens when you read things backwards. Speaking of the quest being prompted, this is Annabeth's quest, and I didn't realise that Annabeth had wanted a quest since she was 7, and this is the first one that she gets. How old is she now? 15, 14 or something? So I'm just, you know, shocked. Are quests that rare to get? Because I feel like Percy always falls headlong into every quest. Speaking of Nico, so we know Nico is missing, but Percy mentioned that Nico is the son of Hades, which we know having read the series backwards. However, I didn't know that nobody else knew that he was the son of Hades in this book. Even Chiron doesn't know, so it's actually quite a big secret on the hush down low. And Nico has some serious beef with Percy. He wants to kill Percy, and I just didn't expect that. I thought that Percy and Nico got along at the beginning, but there is some summarizing backstory given that goes to show that it has something to do with the death of his sister, who I knew she was dead from the 5th book, but I didn't know we got to see it in this series. For some reason I thought she was already dead before we meet Nico, but that's not the case. So I'm looking forward to, probably in the 3rd book, reading about that whole situation and learning a bit more. Oh, while we're at Camp Half-Blood, I was also thinking about how some of the rules are really ridiculous, because Annabeth comes to sit with Percy to discuss something, and everybody's like, yo, what's the daughter of Athena doing sitting at the Poseidon table? I'm like, why is this table rule thing a thing? It's so exclusionary, it's so clique making, and I remember in the 1st book, Percy feels lonely, always sitting at a table by himself, always being in a cabin by himself, which just goes further to show how the rules are utterly ridiculous. But as well as that, Selena goes around and does the inspections of rooms, and it made me think about how the inspection system is really inaccurate, just because, like, it should be easier for Percy to keep his room clean than the Hermes cabin, for example, where everybody is in there, and it should be weighted to how many people are also in the cabin. But as well as that, if Percy's room is a wreck and he's the last one, he will get the worst chore, which could be, say, doing all of the dishes. But unlike if it's the Hermes cabin doing all of the dishes where they have 30 people doing it, it's just Percy, one person doing it. So I feel like there needs to be some weight to how things work there. Maybe they have some systems in place and it's just not an interesting part of the book to discuss when you've got a whole quest going on, but my brain couldn't help thinking about it. This book is so funny. I've laughed multiple times out loud. We've already discussed how Rick Riordan knows how to make us laugh. It continues in this book. Fantastic. Also, the quest has to do with the labyrinth, because there's a door from the labyrinth right into camp and they need to cut that off or keep Luke away from it or whatever, and we already know it's going to be resolved because we've read the 5th book and there's literally no mention of this passageway into Camp Half-Blood. We've just had an encounter. They're in the labyrinth now and they meet Janus, who is the god of doorways, beginnings, endings and choices, and I distinctly remember this scene because I remember being so intrigued by Janus as a god. I thought it was so cool how he had 2 faces, how he was playing with words to make you indecisive, and it was just such a moment of distinct memory when I haven't been able to remember any scene in this book so far. It made me quite happy. We also, Janus was talking about Annabeth having to make a choice, and I sincerely hope that choice has to be made in this book, because if the choice is supposed to be the choice that she makes at the end of the 5th book to give Luke the weapon, I think that would be a very poor lead up that this one is kind of trying to create. So hopefully Annabeth gets to making this important choice at the end of this book rather than it being that like subpar suspense. The last thing I'm going to say in this section is that Hera has come into the mix. She came to talk to them and she's acting all lovely, and I just know the relationship is not going to end lovely because Annabeth mentions how Hera has cursed her in the 5th book and is always trying to accidentally kill her the way that Hera tried to accidentally accidentally kill Hercules in the mythology. So we'll be curious to see how Annabeth manages to ruin that relationship, or maybe it's just Hera in the wrong. We shall see. So the first thing they did in the labyrinth was go and find this Cyclops, which is a 100-handed one, and I know that this Cyclops is fighting in the war in the 5th book, so I knew that they were going to rescue him and save him, and they proceeded to do just that. Right now he's very disheartened, but I think that's going to all change because of the fact that he's fighting happily in the next book. Also, I want to take a brief moment to say that Tyson is the cutest thing. I remember reading this series when I was younger and not caring about Tyson whatsoever. I didn't find him to be an unlikable character, I just didn't particularly care for him in the way that I cared for Grover and Annabeth and Percy. But reading it now, Tyson is really the most adorable thing, and I quite like his character, even more than Grover, which is surprising me. Also, I mentioned in the 5th book that in the beginning of the book they signpost all of these things that I don't understand, one of them being Apollo's sacred cows, and lo and behold, I now understand the reference because they went to a herd and there were these red cows, which are Apollo's sacred cows. And there was also a really nice moment where it echoed the mythology. So Percy kind of ended up in this situation where we had to clean these stables that had loads and loads of poop in them, and it echoes the Hercules story where Hercules had to clean these stables with loads and loads of poop in them. And the book is quite on the nose, it mentions that myth, but I don't think when I read this originally I knew the myth myself, so I didn't really know in which ways it was echoing it, but hey, now I know it. Also, I don't understand how I forgot that part of Percy's powers is his ability to talk to horses. I just totally missed that. The fact is, I read the 5th book and he's literally talking to Blackjack the Pegasus through his mind, but I put that on, you know, it's a Pegasus, so a Pegasus should be able to communicate to demigods. I forgot that it's only Percy with that ability because he tries to talk to these flesh-eating horses and the horses are like, yeah, I want to eat you, and I was like, oh yeah, he has that power. Actually, I'm finding this whole if I make a deal, make sure you swear on the River Styx thing to be a bit annoying. It's just a very annoying get out clause that seems to be used quite often in this series. It's used in the 5th book, it's used here, and we're only 2 books in, so I assume it's going to make an appearance in all 3 of the other books as well. I haven't really been mentioning Annabeth's cap that she has that makes her invisible, because I do remember that in the series. I just don't remember where she gets it from, but I guess we'll find out along the journey. In this one, there's also a metallic spider that appears, and Annabeth is scared out of her mind, and that is the way that I just assumed when I was younger that I was the daughter of Athena before taking the quiz, because I have a huge fear of spiders. Yes, I survived Australia, still scared of spiders. And in this one, they reference a moment where Annabeth and Percy are almost killed by loads of metallic spiders, and I actually remember that scene vividly just because I was thinking, wow, this is my worst nightmare when I read it when I was younger. I'm also really feeling like this book is quite an adventure novel. Like, yes, they get a quest, that's kind of in the name, but they just kind of go through steps on their journey, and I think that's why when I was younger I liked books 1 and 5 more and can remember books 1 and 5 more, because 1 is kind of setting up the world. Sure, there's a quest involved, but it's really mostly getting introduced into the world, and then the last one has a plot to it and it's kind of more plot based than the 3 in the middle, as far as my memory is serving me. The 3 in the middle are really like adventure, you go on a journey, there's a problem, you go on a journey, there's another problem to overcome, journey, problem, then you get to the end. And while there is a little bit of a thread of a plot running through, it's more just like a loosely connected adventure story, and it's not interesting me as much as it probably did when I was younger. I think the 3 books in the middle are not going to be my favourites. I think they're going to be more forgettable and just more run-of-the-mill. I'm starting to think that I like this series more when I was younger rather than rereading it as an adult. Not going to say it's not one of my favourite series, but I feel like it's one that really, you need some of that childhood magic to appreciate it to its full extent, which is not the case with all middle grade. I do think some things are happening a bit conveniently as well. They keep stumbling into exactly what they need to stumble into, and as well as that, when Percy goes into this like den of Telkeens, I don't really know how to pronounce that, they're immediately talking about their evil plan, which is just exactly what he needs to hear. So I do think things are happening a little bit conveniently from time to time. There's a kiss moment between Annabeth and him, which is quite cute, quite sudden, but quite cute, and they did reference it in book 5, so it was nice to see it here. There's also some references of other things I'm going to be looking forward to in my Read It Backwards. For example, Percy mentions that he's met Circe, and I'm excited for that. I would love to meet Circe. It seems like like she's portrayed as a villain in this series, but I'm here for it. After reading that Madeline Miller book, any mention of Circe or Circe, I am here for it. And lastly, they also mentioned that Percy was looking in the sky and saw a huntress constellation, and they said this is a memento or like a memorial for one of the friends that they've had that's passed away, and I can't think which friend they had that had the huntress memorial made for them. So it doesn't say the name either, and I can't remember anyone in particular. I don't think it would be Bianca, so I guess I'll have to wait and see and keep reading. Finished reading the book and we're going to talk about it. So the first thing I want to do is rewind a little bit before, and we meet Hephaestus. I don't know how you pronounce that, but he is a god, and he is a disabled Greek god, and I know in the mythology he's supposed to be really ugly, which is the reason why his wife chucked him out, but I still was just not comfortable with the descriptions, even if it fits with the mythology. So, you know, the disabled god being described as like the most ugly thing and most hideous looking just didn't sit well with me. But again, this is a book that was published quite a while ago, and I've heard that Rick Riordan is much better when it comes to diversity now. Percy keeps making reference to when the gods are debating about killing him at some point, and I'm curious. I want to know when this happens. I think it might be in the third book, but I'm looking forward to it because I don't have any memory of that moment. Percy must be a new Hercules or something, because when he's under the mountain where Typhon is, he draws on such a power that it like blasts him into the air, which makes him seem like an incredibly strong demigod, like one to, you know, fear. And then he drinks from the river Styx in the 5th book, so he must be like the Hercules now, the one that everybody's heard so much about. He's treated that way across the series as well. He's like the demigod with a capital T and a capital D. And Percy blasts his way right onto Calypso's island, and I remember Calypso's island just because it was a beautiful, peaceful place, and I was like, wow, I'd love to live there, but I would get so bored. That's what I was thinking when I was younger, and reading it now, like, Calypso's curse is just so sad. The abandonment issue she must have, it must be so strong. I also quite find it funny, a little bit funny, that Percy Jackson is like, oh, Calypso will always be my biggest what if, and then like in the 5th book he does not spare 2 seconds to think about Calypso. Calypso is not on his mind, so I found that to be quite funny. But in the end of the book, fair enough to him, he does take a moment to think about Calypso towards the end, so there's that. I haven't talked about the fact that Chris Rodriguez is described as being crazy because he was in the Labyrinth, and we know he's going to be fine, which is why I didn't mention it, because I know that he's going to be fine by the 5th book, and seeing as I've already finished the book, I know that Dinius came back and cured his madness, so that was kind of nice and like sweet. Also, here's just more proof that Rick Riordan is kind of a genius, because they were talking about the Labyrinth and all the people that have successfully gone into the Labyrinth and used it and come out, and they mentioned Ariadne and other mortals who can see through the mist, and then he was like, oh yeah, and Harriet Tubman, she used the Labyrinth as well, and she was a daughter of Hermes. I was just like, oh, that's so genius, just having Harriet Tubman use the Labyrinth as the Underground Railroad and have like people who could see through the mist guide her, and being a daughter of Hermes, the messenger god, as she like sends them on their way. I loved it. It was like one line, but I thought this is where you can see his genius and his world building shine. Also, Rachel is the person that is going to guide them through the labyrinth because she can see through the mist, and I have to say, like in the 5th book I didn't really like Rachel. I was kind of annoyed at her for existing and I was a bit harsh. Now in this 4th book I really do like Rachel, and I feel like if I was reading this series forwards I would like Rachel in this book and then therefore still like her in the 5th book because I liked her first, but in the 5th book I got annoyed at her and now I like her because I'm reading it backwards. But Rachel's doing a very good job of just remaining calm and just taking the cruelty that Annabeth is throwing in her face. Maybe cruelty is a bit strong of a word, but Annabeth is being so mean, but Rachel's just kind of being so nice about it, and I admire that about her. That kind of cat kindness when someone is being cruel to you is a good quality to have. In fact, talking about Annabeth, I don't like her as much as I did when I first read this series. Now maybe Annabeth is nicer in books 1, 2 and 3 and therefore you like her in the beginning and continue to like her, but reading backwards, all she's done in these past 2 books is be quite condescending and also quite sulky. I feel like in the 5th book she's a bit condescending, mostly because she knows things that Percy doesn't know, and at the beginning of this one as well she knows things that Percy doesn't know and she's a bit condescending about it. And then in this one she's also really sulky, and I think her reasons for being sulky are not always justified. I know she's got a lot on her plate. One of her best friends has turned completely evil, but still I'm not feeling her character so much. So we meet Ethan briefly and he's in the 5th book and he's like, oh Percy, you're horrific, and he really hates Percy in the 5th book. But here we meet him and he has a little bit to do with the quest, and I feel like his strong dislike of Percy is a bit uncalled for in the 5th book. Maybe it should just be a bit more of an annoyance that Percy keeps perking up into his life and messing around. But I get where he's coming from in wanting revenge from all the minor gods that don't get that acknowledgement. I've talked about this in the 5th one. And also I didn't see the plot twist coming where Quintus is actually Daedalus, and I didn't see it coming. I didn't remember that plot twist, but it also makes a lot of sense. It was kind of hinted at in the beginning, like all this mystery surrounding Quintus, but he's a good guy, but he's also a bad guy. I should have figured it out, but I didn't figure it out. So that was very well done. We get to see Kronos become Luke, or like Luke become Kronos, which I knew happened by the 5th book, but I didn't know we'd actually get to see that transformation. I thought it'd be one of those things that you're just told about in a dream rather than get to see firsthand. I really like that scene just because Rachel throws a blue hairbrush and kind of whacks him on the head, and I found that quite funny. I was smiling, I was laughing, and I know Kronos is supposed to be evil, but just for 1 second, imagine having his power, the power to control time and to slow it down while still doing everything at your leisure. I would love his power. Speaking of powers, we've got to talk about Nico. Nico in this one, he goes through a lot of ups and downs. He is kind of a castaway, and I feel for Hades. Hades is a god who has a lot on his plate because he has to rule the whole underworld and everybody, like all of the Olympians, don't like him, and Nico's kind of falling into that where he doesn't quite fit in camp. He doesn't even have like a cabin for himself, and I know that Percy solves this in the 5th book for all of Camp Half-Blood, but it's still like it implements the big gaps that were in the camp, and the fact that he feels like he can't have friends and he's just too different because he hangs out with the dead all the time. I was feeling things for Nico. I wanted him to be loved and included and just cherished like all the other campers in Camp Half-Blood. It made me so sad to like see his storyline. And he has such cool powers. The only thing about Nico, like he's dealing with grief in this one too, but the only thing about Nico is I cannot imagine him as 12 years old. Like he reads like he's 15. Like the rest of them, Percy and Annabeth. At one point we have Pan's death happening, which we knew was going to happen because of the events in the 5th book, and I actually really enjoyed that scene, not as in I enjoyed Pan dying, but I liked how it was a bit of a call to activism about how everyone needs to protect nature and everyone has to do their part. And even though it was part of the book and he was talking to these characters, you could tell he was also really talking to the reader, which is a valuable message to include in a middle grade series. Really appreciated reading that. I also want to say that I like Dinius, so this is going towards the end where Dinius appears briefly and he kind of talks a bit and cleans things up, and he's also a bit sad that his son has just died. And we didn't get to see Dinius in the 5th book because lots was going on, but I do remember that he's very sarcastic all the time and he's kind of grumpy. I really like the grumpy gods like Hades, Dinius, loving them. So I just love the brief scenes that we got to see with him here, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of him in books 1 to 3 where I know he's a bit more present. The whole battle thing with Daedalus wrapped up with him dying and the laptop being given to Annabeth and Miss O'Leary being given to Percy's protection, and we knew all of that was going to happen. It was nicely tied up. Very good ending part there. Also Annabeth mentions the end of the quest, and we get to see the lines of the prophecy that she hadn't shared before, and how like the love situation could have been Luke, could have been Percy, and it explains the setup for the 5th book where Annabeth and Percy are very distant from each other and Rachel's in the picture and nobody really knows what's going on feeling wise. So I feel like that conclusion there, that moment, cleared up a lot of the feelings that they have at the beginning of the 5th book. Hera turns up and she gets mad at Annabeth, and I feel like that wasn't quite fair. I feel like Percy was just as mean to Hera as Annabeth was to Hera, so I'm not saying like curse two people rather than one, but I feel like if you were going for equality, curse two people instead of one, because they both made the mistakes there. It was quite cute seeing Percy's birthday party at the end and how he invited Nico in, and how Paul was there asking for advice about marrying Sally, and Poseidon came and Tyson was there. I thought the ending was very sweet, okay? I liked that birthday scene, that brief glimpse of happiness and peace that he got. And just to wrap up here, something I wanted to mention before but completely forgot to, was that I really like Blackjack. He's quite funny as Pegasus. He gets like 5 lines per book so far, and I enjoy his character quite a bit. And there we have it. Those are all my thoughts on Percy Jackson and the Battle of the Labyrinth. I really didn't remember this one as much as the 5th one at all, so I was learning quite a bit while reading, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the middle book is going to bring me, because I think it's going to be full of surprises just like this book was. I would rate this 3 stars if I was reading it now. When I was younger, I probably would have rated it 4 stars, and I can see that it's more so something to do with age and development rather than the book not being as good as it was before. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comment section down below. Have you read this book? What were your thoughts? Do you agree with anything I said? Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!